There are so many great speeches delivered by so many great speakers. How do you pick a best one? Now, if we look back to the 20th century, Martin Luther King probably just scrapes it with I Have a Dream. If we're looking at the 21st century, do we have any contenders? Have we already heard the I Have a Dream of the 2000s? Well, at the end of last year on my LinkedIn, I posted 5 contenders that I believe so far could be the speech of the 21st century. And you know, if you watched my recent analysis video of Brené Brown's TED Talk, I actually consider that to be one of the 5 candidates. Another one of the 5 candidates is the speech we're looking at today. Now, why are we looking at Jacinda Ardern's 2019 Christchurch memorial speech? Well, I think when it comes to notable, impactful speeches, I do feel that certainly in the last century, politicians very much got the edge. I think that is changing a little bit more now. But when you're looking at who is in a position to make an impact with their words, who can rally and gather that collective action to create change in the world, politicians still have that angle and that capability. And what I think I like a lot about this speech, not just in terms of the delivery of the speech, but actually thinking of the backstory. Because what we're looking at here is a leader who's not long in power. So Jacinda Ardern, her party kind of won the 2017 election in New Zealand. And I say kind of won because they needed to enter a coalition with not one, but 2 different parties to get power. So although they became the ruling government, Jacinda and her party didn't necessarily get an overwhelming vote of confidence. She goes into coalition with these 2 parties. She becomes the 2nd youngest head of state in the world at that time. And 18 months into her leadership, she's already dealt with a volcanic eruption. And the next thing that comes along is the Christchurch attack. A terrorist attack live streamed on Facebook. 100 people were killed or injured. It was a particularly racially and religiously motivated attack. And Jacinda comes to this memorial service and she's got to think of something to say. How do you capture the pain of what's just happened? And how do you try to provide a way forward? And she's got to balance those 2 things in a short period of time. And we'll look at what she does in the speech to enable her to do that. But I'm also going to look a little bit at what happens after this speech, because I think that's another big thing that plays into why I'm picking out this speech as a contender for Speech of the Century. Because after the memorial, Jacinda, her government, her party got to work and they went into Parliament and they ultimately ended up passing a bill on gun control. They saw that there was a loophole that the attacker had been able to use to gather the weapons for this attack. They closed that loophole. And then on top of that, Jacinda, along with the French president, Emmanuel Macron, they formed the Christchurch Memorial Organization. And basically this is an organization aiming to bring together governments and tech companies to try and stop the spread of terrorism and extremist views online. As I said, this attack was live streamed on Facebook. They were looking at all of these different ways that terrorism can be enabled and spread. And so far, they've got over 130 governments and tech companies signed up to this organization and this promise. So when we're looking at this speech, it's a small snapshot in time. The speech is only 7 minutes, but we've got so much background and build up of how Jacinda might not have been the leader in this situation. It wasn't a guarantee that she was going to become the leader. She was a young leader in terms of her age. She was a young leader in terms of her time in office, only a year and a half. And then we're looking at the impact after this. What actually changed? Well, something did change after this. So this speech really sits in the middle of what I think to be some interesting background to the speech and also some interesting change after the speech. And we're going to break down exactly what's happened in this in-betweeny moment in these 7 minutes on stage. Now, quick legal disclaimer before we get started. I'm using the footage provided by Guardian News today. I do not claim ownership of this footage, and the use of this footage is for informational and educational purposes only. And I certainly believe we have a lot to learn with what I consider to be one of the contenders for the speech of the 21st century so far. It's the Christchurch Memorial Speech by Jacinda Ardern. Jacinda starts this speech. She starts it in her non-native language. Jacinda is speaking Maori, the indigenous language of New Zealand. And firstly, this is a brave choice. To use any language that is not your native language in a speech is a brave choice. To start your speech in that way is especially courageous. But I think it's also a really powerful moment of symbolism. This is because the Christchurch attacker was a white supremacist. If you are speaking English, there is this association of English with white Europeans. So instead, Jacinda goes to the heart of New Zealand. She uses an indigenous language to start. So this shows that she is connecting with the indigenous population of New Zealand. She's connecting with the people of colour of New Zealand. So I think it's a really important moment of symbolism that she chooses to not speak in her native language, instead choosing the indigenous language. It's showing the building of a bridge, building of connection. It's showing that empathy and community and diversity. And this is a message and a theme that Jacinda is going to weave a lot more through her speech. It's a great choice to begin with. It's a bold choice. And it's actually not the last example we're going to see in this speech either.
We have often found ourselves without words. What words adequately express the pain and suffering of 50 men, women and children lost and so many injured? What words capture the anguish of our Muslim community being the target of hatred and violence? What words express the grief of a city that has already known so much pain? I thought there were...
I'm sure you heard what words, what words, what words. So we've got a repetition, we've got a rule of three, and this is a particular type of repetition. It's called anaphora. So anaphora is repeating phrases at the start of successive statements. So the way that I remember anaphora is at the start, anaphora. And what Jacinda is doing here with what words, what words, what words, she's demonstrating the difficulty of being able to describe the pain that family and friends and loved ones are going through this moment. She's showing that difficulty of when you're in pain, when you're in challenge, she understands that it's difficult to be able to say anything that makes that better. So we're seeing here a speaking technique. It's an anaphora, it's a rule of three, it's repetition. But really what the technique is coming down to is the technique is demonstrating empathy. Jacinda is showing how hard it is for her to come up here and say anything that changes the situation. And again, empathy is this thread and this theme that's going through this speech, and to be honest, goes through Jacinda's entire leadership and communication style. But it's certainly epitomized in this speech. And I always think this is an important thing to come back to. When we're talking about speaking, when we're talking about techniques, you don't do the technique because it's a technique. You don't go, oh, well, I learned about anaphora the other day, so I'm going to use that in a speech. I'm going to look very sophisticated and clever. No, the technique is just a means to an end. The technique is enabling you to communicate or to express something. And what Jacinda here is really wanting to communicate and express is that empathy. And that anaphora, that technique, is what allows her to do so.
And then I came here and was met with this simple greeting. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
We heard some Maori earlier on. Now we hear Arabic. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Jacinda uses her third language in this speech. And again, this isn't her showing off her multilingualism. This is finding the way to connect with the audience. The Christchurch terrorist targeted Muslim communities. Now, of course, Muslims don't exclusively speak Arabic, of course, but Arabic is the mother language of Islam. And so when Jacinda goes to use Arabic in her speech, again, it's showing this connection. It's linking back to the same reason why she used Maori earlier on. It's showing that diversity, that community, that connection. She's reaching out to a community, building a bridge using their language, using their terms. Again, it's just this touch of empathy and connection. And it's one of the big reasons why I love this speech. Jacinda has a hard enough time being able to create this speech in her own language. To then think about how to bring other languages in is a bold move. But in some ways, it's actually the logical move. Because instead of trying to sum up just using your own language, sometimes other languages can provide the means. Sometimes other languages give you ways to express things in the way that yours can't. If in English we say, peace be upon you, like, of course that phrase has meaning. But when you go to the Arabic, assalamu alaikum, that has a different meaning and a different context that is richer than just saying, peace be upon you, using the English. So we're seeing multiple languages utilized by Jacinda here. Again, it's all thinking about how do I build connection and how do I meet people where they are? And how do I really empathize and connect with those who've been affected by this most? This was a white supremacist attack on minority groups. And so what Jacinda is thinking about doing is, if I stand here as a white person speaking English, that doesn't have that same empathy and connection as if I reach out to those groups and I use their language to try and build that bridge and connection. So again, not showing off the different multilingualness, and also not the last time that we're going to hear these different languages either. We're going to see how they're employed later on in this speech.
They were simple words, repeated by community leaders who witnessed the loss of their friends and loved ones. Simple words whispered by the injured from their hospital beds. Simple words spoken by the bereaved and everyone I met who has been affected by this attack.
Here we see the rule of three. Again, we hear that repetition, simple words, simple words, simple words. This time, the repetition and the rule of three is serving slightly different purpose. You'll notice that when Jacinda uses simple words, she then describes a scene or a situation that's come out of the attack. She talks about, well, these are simple words that we hear from families and loved ones. These are simple words that we hear in the hospitals and from the first responders. So what Jacinda does is she's using this repetition rule of three to tie together everyone involved, to create this sense of unity. This is something that has affected all of us. We were all in different places, in different contexts, and had different experiences of this one event. But we were all part of this one event in one way or another. So here we're seeing similar technique to what was employed before, a three repetition, but this time the three repetition is doing something slightly different. And again, this is a technique that we're going to see a lot in this speech. And if you've covered anything about speaking techniques, you'll probably know that the rule of three is like the granddaddy technique. It's the one that everyone talks about. It's the one that everyone uses. But it's working out, what is the rule of three actually doing for you? What is this technique helping you to express, to communicate, or to connect with? And you'll see that I actually just used a rule of three to explain the rule of three there. So it's not the technique itself that we're looking at. You can learn the techniques in a couple of days, but understanding how the techniques enhance your speech, how the techniques help you to express yourself in your speech, well, that is a lifetime of learning.
There were stories of those who were born here, grew up here, or who had made New Zealand their home, who had...
So here you see another rule of three. Born here, grew up here, made New Zealand their home. Jacinda is making a fine point of nuance here. And again, you've got to think about the context in which this is happening. The context of the terrorist attack was a white supremacist who was attacking others, outsiders, what was perceived to be others, outsiders. And Jacinda really subtly makes the point here that regardless of whether you're born here, grew up here, or you've decided to make New Zealand your home, you are all just as much New Zealanders as everyone else. So this is a really unifying statement. It's a statement of community, that being New Zealand is not about where you're born, it's not about the color of your skin, it's not about your religion, it's about these shared values and the shared community. So here we see, again, it's the same technique. I've basically only talked about rule of three and speaking in different languages this whole speech. So you see that Jacinda isn't using a variety of different techniques here, but it's understanding here are a few key techniques that are really going to help me to make my point. And also the subtlety and nuance of those techniques, because yes, you can use the same technique, but how you use the technique, when you use the technique, and the intention behind the technique is what decides whether it works or not. Rule of three, employed consistently, but employed in different ways to help her to build and expand upon her argument.
They now form part of our collective memories. They will remain with us forever. They are us.
I love that little statement. They are us. For those of you who have been on some of my masterclasses before, or I've even talked about it on some of these video analysis, you'll know that I talk about 4 speaking styles. And the speaking style that we're really seeing lent into heavily here is the Queen style of speaking. Now, the Queen style, it's all about relationship, connection, empathy, vulnerability, but it's also about commonality. And one of the things that Queen speakers use really well, or when you're speaking in the Queen style, is finding that connecting language. Queen speakers often talk about we and us. And that little statement of they are us is a fantastic bridge builder. It's showing, look, there is not difference between them and us. There is similarity between them and us. It's a great connection statement. It's a great unifying statement. 3 words, but 3 words that say so much.
But with that memory comes a responsibility.
Responsibility. Great leaders challenge their followers. There is a responsibility. What Jacinda is saying here is that there is something that we need to do. There is an obligation, there's a duty that we've got to take on. Jacinda is saying, look, this isn't just about connecting and feeling sorry for each other and sharing this moment of pain and getting through it. There's actually something beyond this. There's a further step we need to take. There's a progression, there's a journey, there's a direction. And it's a bold thing to do at this moment in time, because when people are in that pain, in that grief, it's one of the least motivating states to be in. You don't want to do anything or get out of it. It's a tough place to be. But what Jacinda recognizes is that you can't stay in that pain and grief forever. You've got to move past that pain and grief. And when you move past that pain and grief, what are you moving into? Because a lot of the time when people move out of pain and grief, they move into something that's dysfunctional. They move into anger, resentment, hatred, violence. In fact, some of the underlying emotions that drove this attack in the first place. And so Jacinda's recognizing that in her role as a leader, she's got to make sure that when people move past this pain and grief, first of all, she's got to help them to move past this pain and grief and get out of it. But then she's also got to think about, well, what are we moving into? So this is her challenge here, using that word responsibility of saying, look, this is what we need to be thinking about. This is where we need to be going. We need to be challenging ourselves not to stoop to the level of someone like the attacker and be driven by those same dysfunctional, unhelpful emotions, but rather, are we going to see ourselves as something better than that? Are we going to move forward, and are we going to try and do something impactful about this? And of course, this is foreshadowing and preempting a little bit some of those legislative changes that she makes, some of those collaborations that she starts doing with the foundation. Of course, we don't know any of that now, but you can see that these seeds are already being planted. Great leaders understand the importance of challenging their followers. Challenging, of course, in a productive way, challenging in a positive way, challenging with good intentions behind it. But you've still got to challenge. And that's what Jacinda, even in this difficult moment, even amongst this pain and grief, understands the importance of being able to set that challenge and lead people towards it.
But even the ugliest of viruses can exist in places they are not welcome.
Jacinda starts to build this metaphor of hatred and divisiveness as a virus. And a little bit of sort of dramatic irony here that this is coming in March 2019 and a whole context comes in March 2020 that has a very different look at this metaphor of a virus and how it spreads. And so much of the divisiveness that came through COVID is almost kind of being foreshadowed a little bit in this speech. Of course, Jacinda wasn't to know this at the time, but what she does know is understanding that you've got to give people, in order to address a problem, you've got to give them a tangible vision of that problem. If you just talk about hatred and divisiveness, these are conceptual, abstract words. You've got to give it something more visual. And so Jacinda uses that visualness of a virus. People understand what a virus is. They understand it's not good, it's unhealthy for you, how it spreads, how difficult it is to fight and do something about. So it's a powerful metaphor to help her to get the audience to visualize this is the problem, this is some of the key features of that problem. And she starts to build this metaphor. It's something that she's going to hark back to later on in her speech as well. Whenever you're presenting a problem or a challenge to your audience, you've got to think about how to turn that problem and challenge from something that's conceptual and abstract into something that's tangible, something that people can see in their mind's eye, something they can focus on, and something that they can understand, well, this is why we need a solution, and also this is what a solution might look like.
Racism exists, but it is not welcome here. An assault on the freedom of any one of us who practices their faith or religion is not welcome here. Violence and extremism in all its forms is not welcome here.
We are seeing the full repertoire of repetitions of threes here. And here we're seeing anaphora's sibling. We're seeing epistrophe. So instead of the statement being repeated at the start of successive statements, we hear it at the end of successive statements. Not welcome here, not welcome here, not welcome here. Again, the way that I remember epistrophe is E is at the end, anaphora at the start, epistrophe at the end. So again, this is not, oh, I learnt this fancy technique and I'm going to use it, or I know I'm supposed to do things in threes. What Jacinda is doing here is she is outlining, here's what we're fighting against. Here's the antagonist. So she's highlighting, here's the things that we don't want to have. The racism, the divisiveness, picking on people because of their religion or their race or any demographic factor is not welcome here. In order to stand for something, you've also got to stand against something. And this can sometimes feel a little bit confrontational. And it's a balance between making sure it's not something that's confrontational for confrontational sake. You've got to set out your stall of what you stand for and believe in, which means that you don't believe the opposite. So if you're for diversity and kindness, you are against segregation and hatred. That's just how opposites work. So what Jacinda is doing here is she's making it really clear on her stance. This is what we're standing for, and this is what we're fighting against. This is what's not welcome here. You, again, when you're thinking about leading your audience and leading your followers, you've got to think about, okay, where am I directing them towards? So if we've got this challenge and we've got that problem, where are we directing that action? What are they going to be struggling through? What are they going to be overcoming? What are they going to be fighting against? And again, not fighting in necessarily a confrontational manner, but fighting in terms of the struggle, the sweat, the hard work. You've got to set up that protagonist, antagonist. You've got to set up what you're standing for, what you're standing against. And that's what this epistrophe rule of three is doing here. Yes, it's a fancy technique. Yes, it's something that you sort of have to scroll down the literary techniques to find out. It's a cool thing to use, but it's not being used just because it's this cool thing. It's being used to serve a purpose. It's being used to set out Jacinda's stall and going, right, this is what we're doing. This is who we are. This is who we're not. This is what we're trying to overcome.
To the 95-year-old man who took 4 buses to attend a rally because he couldn't sleep from the sadness of seeing the hurt and suffering of others.
Jacinda uses a technique here that's been employed in many of the notable and impactful speeches of history. You use a single story to tell a larger story. So Jacinda picks out this story of this 95-year-old man. He travelled on 4 buses. He went to a march. What she's demonstrating here is the importance of caring, the importance of being moved by something. And when you care and feel moved by something, to do something about it, to rally together, to work with other people, to do something that matters. So she shares this single story that's remarkable, but that single story then speaks to a bigger story of how can we have more of that empathy and compassion for others? How can we make an effort to help and support others? That's what that story is all about. It's someone who's really old, who has all of the excuses and reasons to stay at home and feel bad about the situation, but not do any more than that. Or someone who says, you know what, I might be old, but I'm going to make the effort to be there, be part of something that's important, add my voice and add my contribution to that. The single story that's telling a larger story is a hugely powerful technique to use in speeches. Jacinda understands the importance of that, and she's found that single story that encapsulates the message that she's wanting to share.
It's to make the very best of us a daily reality, because we are not immune to the viruses of hate, of fear, of other. We never have been. But we can be the nation that discovers the cure. And
couple of different things to unpack there. This is hard to pick a favorite part of the speech, but this is certainly a part of the speech that I think is so well set up and thought about in terms of what's the effects I'm wanting to gain here. So the first thing that we see that link back to the virus metaphor. So whenever you're setting up a metaphor or an analogy in your speech, don't just say it once and go, yeah, I created a cool metaphor, now let go and do the work. No, it's something that you build upon and develop. So earlier, Jacinda has set up and engineered this idea of the virus metaphor. And she uses this virus metaphor again. She uses a rule of three, so another law technique. So she demonstrates these are the things that spread. If we don't do something about this, if we aren't careful, if we don't maintain, in virus it's in terms of maintaining your medical health, but if we don't maintain our societal health, we can get sick. And these things can bring us down. These things can hurt us. These things can kill us. Just like a virus. And then she builds upon that a little bit more by saying, we can be the nation that discovers the cure. So you get this full circle moment of the setting up of the metaphor and the analogy, using the metaphor and analogy to help the audience to see the challenge in a tangible way, to understand, well, here are some of the key aspects of that challenge. Here's what we're facing up against. Using it again to highlight this is the things that we are fighting, and then rounding it all off with that call to action, that rallying call of, yes, this is something that's really difficult to fight, but it's something that we can fight. It's this really great bit of speechcraft. It's more than just a technique. Using the rule of three, saying three things in a row, even with all of the good kind of thought and engineering behind what Jacinda's been doing so far, you say three things in a row. Yeah, anyone can write three things in a row. Anyone can write three statements, three phases, whether it's anaphora or epistrophe. But seeing your speech as a larger whole, seeing how the different parts of your speech link together, that's a much more difficult job and task. And what we're seeing here is that more holistic look at the speech. It's not, I'm going to use a technique here, 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 and here, and that makes me a great speaker. No, it's understanding this is the overarching purpose and mission behind this speech, and how does all of my speech come together to build into that overarching purpose and mission.
Let that be the legacy of the 15th of March. To be the nation we believe ourselves to be.
Be the nation we believe ourselves to be. People's beliefs drive what they do in life. How you see the world, what you think is true about the world, dictates your life, your actions, your experiences, your direction. As a speaker, if we can speak to people's beliefs and we can change or enhance someone's belief, we can change what they do, how they see the world, how they experience it, their outcomes and impact in their lives. People's beliefs are hard to change. Go and read any social media comment thread and you'll see a bunch of people who are entrenched in their beliefs arguing with each other, and they aren't going to change anyone's belief. People's beliefs do change, but it's difficult. As leaders, it is our responsibility to speak to people's beliefs. Because if we're leading people in a direction, if we're getting people to try and do something they haven't done before, to overcome some kind of challenge they haven't overcome before, that requires them to have a different belief about who they are and what they can do. And you need to speak to that. You need to awaken that different belief within them that allows them to do things they haven't done before. It's tough to change, but that's what great leadership is. Great leadership is about creating tough change. It's about helping people to overcome tough challenges. And to be able to have this tough change, overcome those tough challenges, you need to do the tough job of speaking to people's beliefs and awakening something new within them.
Of extremism breeding extremism, and it must end. We cannot confront.
You hear that emphasis on end? Must, pause, drop down, end. You have that sinking inflection, not a rising inflection. It must end. I don't know if it should. It must end. That drop of inflection is a confidence statement. It's a conviction statement. And just that little change of voice shows the conviction. It shows this is something that needs to happen. This is something we're going to work on. This is something that changes. As a leader, you have to show conviction. People won't follow you if you say, follow me. They'll follow you if you say, follow me. Now, of course, it's more than just you speak this way and that automatically makes you a leader. Go and watch my video on Elizabeth Holmes to see how just changing your voice does not mean that you're a good leader. But what you're hearing here is that confidence and conviction coming through. Must end. Jacinda is setting out her stall. She's saying, this is what I stand for, this is what I stand against, and this is what we're going to do. This is the challenge, this is what we're going to do about it. And as a follower, you want to look up to a leader who has conviction. Not blind recklessness and certainty. Leaders shouldn't be certain, because with that sense of certainty comes a tunnel vision, comes a recklessness, comes a lack of empathy for others. But you want a leader to have conviction. This is what I'm going to do, even if it's tough, even if not everyone follows me to begin with, even if we face some more challenges as a result of it, this is my stall, this is where I'm going. And that's what people follow.
But for now, we will remember those who have left this place. We will remember the first responders who gave so much of themselves to save others. We will remember the tears of our nation and the new resolve we have formed. And we remember that ours is a home that does not and cannot claim perfection, but
remember, remember, remember. You're hearing that repetition of remember as a summary. Now, you'll see so many kind of bad endings where people telegraph the ending and they go, in conclusion, in summary, I need to say this term to show the audience that I'm ending. You shouldn't need to telegraph an ending in order for your audience to understand that you're coming to an end. When you watch a film or a TV show, when you get to those last 10 minutes, you can feel the story coming to an end. You don't need a disclaimer of, by the way, there's only 10 minutes left to go of the film, we're nearly at the end. You don't need that telegraphed, do you? You just feel the natural flow coming towards that. And so Jacinda is building that natural flow. She's taking the speech to an end. When she's talking about memory and remembering, that is future-orientated language. I know she's talking about the past, which sounds a little bit weird, but she's talking about this is something we will look back on and remember. This is what we're moving towards. We're moving towards this, and we're going to remember this along the way. So she's using the repetition here to help her to summarize her speech, to show here are all the things that I've talked about, and also this is the direction that we're moving in. And it's far more effective than someone saying, in conclusion, I have talked about this, 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 and this. That's fine if you're starting out and you're trying to put speeches together and you're just trying to get up there and speak, but it's such a formulaic way, and it's unnecessary to end a speech like that. You can do the same thing. You can remind the audience, this is what we've covered and this is where we're going, but you can do it in a smoother way than that. And what Jacinda is demonstrating here is that smoother way of bringing the speech to an end and setting up the final flourish.
But we can strive to be true to the words embedded in our national anthem. Men of every creed and race, gather here before thy face.
I won't let Jacinda recite the whole New Zealand national anthem here. You can go and look that up for yourselves. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that Jacinda was drawing upon the national anthem. And here I think there's a really interesting choice, because the idea of nationalism has become this loaded, almost toxic term nowadays, that nationalism is seen as something that's xenophobic, that's divisive, that's racist. And what Jacinda is doing here is she's drawing upon nationalism, but she's reframing nationalism as nationalism isn't about us versus them, about this is who we are and we don't want anything to do with them. She is revising nationalism as nationalism is actually something that brings us together. Nationalism is about our community. She's focusing on how nationalism unites us, not how nationalism divides us. So again, it's a bold choice here. She's almost drinking from the poison chalice a little bit, in terms of nationalism is seen as something that has led to and contributed to this terrorist attack, this warped and skewed perception of what nationalism is. So Jacinda kind of takes the enemy on their own turf of going, I am going to speak about nationalism. I'm not going to shy away from nationalism as something that could be seen as divisive. I'm going to talk about nationalism in a way of unity. I'm going to talk about here are the things, here are the values, here are the experiences that unite us as New Zealanders. So again, this is another bold choice to take on what might be perceived as the enemy, to take on the opponent, fight them on their own turf, and then bring it back to your side and use it as something as positive and empowering rather than something that is negative and disempowering.
God defend New Zealand. Ko tātou tātou. Assalamu alaikum.
God defend New Zealand. English. I won't try and say the Maori, I'll butcher it. Assalamu alaikum. We see the three languages that Jacinda has used to reach out, to create unity, to create community. She's used those three languages to finish the speech, one after the other. English, Maori, Arabic. Again, it's not using the language for language's sake. It's not going, you know what, I'm going to speak another language because that's going to look cool and sophisticated on stage. No, it's a real understanding of, I can do this speech in English, but just doing this speech in English is going to have some limitations and some perceptions. Are there ways that I can use other languages to help me to express more clearly what I'm trying to say, to connect with the audience in a way that I couldn't if I just used the one language alone? Jacinda has really understood that, embraced that, and expressed that in this speech. It's such a great rounding. She delivers a speech largely in English, but her starting and finishing words are not English. She starts in Maori, finishes in Arabic. Now, I don't know if that was a deliberate choice to have that mirroring in that exact way. I feel that if it wasn't, it should have been. It's demonstrating the unity. That, yes, there's a whole lot of English in the middle, but there's a whole lot of diversity and community and unity around that as well. It's a fantastic finish. It's an incredibly well-crafted speech. And what I like about this speech is that there is an element of simplicity, apart from having to speak languages that aren't your native language. If you think about the techniques that I've talked about in this speech, I haven't talked about this huge variety of techniques. I haven't talked about, oh, here are these 15 different techniques. Jacinda's basically lent upon the rule of three pretty strongly, a little bit of metaphoric language, and some appropriate challenging as a speaker. And that's largely it. But what she's done is understood the power of those techniques, and most importantly, using those techniques in the most effective way. And ultimately, when it comes down to thinking about our speeches, think about, we have this toolbox of techniques. It's not about using all the techniques to show off, here's all the things I know about speaking, how wonderful I am. The bigger your toolbox, the more choice you have about the best tool to use. And that might be some obscure, rarely used technique. You might be looking at an antipeti modi. I can never actually say the whole thing. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It might be a more obscure technique like that, but only use it if it's the most appropriate technique. Don't just use it because you watched an analysis video on YouTube and you think, oh, that'd be cool to use in a speech. Jacinda understands the power of simplicity in getting her to present a really tough speech. Presenting a speech that's tough in her own personal leadership journey, presenting a speech that's tough in the context of which she's saying, presenting a speech that's tough in terms of the audience that she's delivering it to. Now, as I said, this is a candidate for one of my speeches of the 21st century, if not the speech of the 21st century. Of course, no speech is perfect. So, if Jacinda was to go back and do this speech again, what could she improve and how could she make it even more impactful than she did? Let's have a look at a few things I picked up.
Their faith or religion is not welcome here. Violence and extremism in all its forms is not welcome here. And over the last 2 weeks, we have shown that.
Jacinda stands on the applause a little bit there. It's difficult to know with any speech what the moments the audience are going to react to are. Sometimes you've got this really funny joke in there, and sometimes there's a joke that's worked on other audiences and you go and deliver it on the day and not rating it. And then other times you've got what you thought was this throwaway statement and suddenly you get this huge reaction and applause to it. So sometimes you can't plan your speech in terms of, I know I'm going to get a reaction here. I will pause and let the audience react. But what the best speakers do is they stay so in the moment with their audience that when that reaction comes, especially if it's an organic reaction, they allow what happens in the moment to happen. And so here, Jacinda has built up this really effective statement. She's doing the not welcome here that we talked about earlier in the video. And you can see this is something that really resonates with the audience, and they have that vocal expression of that. Now, Jacinda's not to know that it would be those particular statements that would get that response. But what I'd want her to do here is when that response happens, allow it to happen. You can see that she's going, okay, good. I'm glad that you enjoyed that, but I do need to move on to the next thing I want to say. When you're thinking about how does this speech land an impact with people, when you have that emotional response is what you've just said sinking in for your audience. So much of our memory is emotional. It's why we forget where we put our keys so much, because there is no emotional attachment to our keys. But I bet you don't forget the first time that your partner said, I love you. Why don't we forget that? Because that memory has that deep emotional anchor. When you say something that gets that response from the audience, that is you creating an emotional memory. That's you giving yourself the opportunity to leave that particular message with the audience. We talk so much, or we, the royal we, I speak so much about how your audience forget most of what you say in a speech. 80% of it, boom, it's gone by the time you've finished. The next day, the next week, the next month, if you've got fractions of a percent still in there, you're doing a pretty good job. So you've got to make sure that the things that do stay with the audience are the most important things. So when you get that applause, when you get that reaction, don't step on it because you're stepping on the memory. You're stepping on that processing for the audience. You're stepping on that opportunity for that thing that you just said to be something that lasts with the audience, not till tomorrow, not till next week, not even till next month, but for the rest of their lives. That could be the thing that sticks with them. Don't step on it and deny them the opportunity to have that impact from your words.
Reached out to embrace New Zealand and our Muslim community. To all of those who have gathered here with us, we say thank you.
Do you see that? We see a gesture. It's a great gesture. It's everyone who's gathered here. It's acknowledging the audience. It's that idea of connection. It's reaching out. Great. I think this is the only gesture that I see in this whole speech. Now, feel free to tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. People love doing that. But I believe this is the only gesture in the whole speech. And that, for me, is a missed opportunity. I think one of my criticisms of politicians and political speeches, even to a certain extent, speeches that aren't delivered by professional speakers, but especially something I see in politics, is there is so much reliance on the script and the podium. Now, you've got to deliver loads of speeches as a politician. I recognize that you can't spend all of your time rehearsing your speeches and none of your time doing your leadership stuff. But what I do want to see here is I did want to see a little bit more of dynamism. And I think there's a couple of factors that are coming in here. That the notes in the podium don't help with that. I also think that Jacinda's got the tribal attire on, and I noticed the way that that's hanging over her arms is probably restricting her arm movement a little bit here. So there are a few factors that I think have reduced that sense of gesture, but I do want to see a little bit more dynamism. You can speak at a podium with notes and still bring in some really great gestures that add to and enhance what you're saying. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the speech is ruined because there was no gestures. As I say, this is still a candidate for one of the speeches of the 21st century. But you can still make it even more dynamic. You can make it better. And you don't have to use tons of gestures, but it's just finding those little opportunities and those moments for a gesture that adds to what you're saying. And that was a great example right here. That was a gesture. It wasn't big, it wasn't massive, but it was something that added to what Jacinda was saying. And I think there's more opportunities through the rest of the speech for these small gestures that make a big difference.
Breeding extremism, and it must end. We cannot confront.
All right, poor Jacinda. I'm picking on her twice for the same thing, but I'm looking at it from a slightly different angle. You know the expression, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. What I'm looking for here is Jacinda's had a moment of spontaneous applause. And you know what? Often audiences don't do that. Often you'll do an entire speech and you won't get any spontaneous applause that comes up throughout. But what we have had is we've had one instant where Jacinda has said a punchy statement, the audience have reacted and applauded. So now what you're thinking of as a speaker is, okay, this is an audience that will react in that way, that will express themselves in that way during my speech. And now you want to have that sense of anticipation. Even when Jacinda was crafting this line of must end, I would still be thinking of, okay, this is a punchy conviction statement. I want to give that statement a little bit of time to breathe. So even if she was delivering on Zoom, no audience, she couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, whatever, must end, I would still want to leave that statement sitting with the audience. Now, especially when you've got a live audience, when you've just said a punchy statement like that, they might like it. They might react to it. So I think here, Jacinda has missed a little bit of anticipation of thinking, this is a statement that just by itself, I want to give a little bit of air. But especially it might be something that the audience respond to, because the audience have responded to something that I said with a similar vein earlier in the speech. So I think it's a tough speech to deliver. It's a challenging speech in challenging circumstances to an audience who are experiencing challenging emotions. So it's difficult to really be in the moment of your speech and feel it, because you're thinking so much about, I want to do a good job, I want to do this justice, I want to strike the right tone, connect with the audience in the right way. So of course it's really hard here, but equally I'm holding Jacinda to high standards here as well. She's a world leader. She certainly at this point is a good speaker. I think she's continuing to develop into an even better speaker. This is one of the speeches of the 21st century, in my opinion. So it's a high bar that we're holding to here. I'm not saying I could go into this situation and do a better job, but what I am saying is, looking at this, looking at high standards, if there's something that we could improve, I think that would be it, of recognizing that even in a difficult speech, even when you're thinking of so many things and trying to get it right, you've still got to do your best to stay in the moment, be with the audience, be on that wavelength with them, and be able to react and respond. Because when you're thinking about this underlying theme and message of empathy, which is something that Jacinda has built up through this, that response and reaction is empathy. It's being able to anticipate this is what someone is experiencing and how they might respond, and being in the moment and anticipating that might happen and responding to it when they do. So feels a little bit nitpicky with some of the things that I've suggested, but as I said, high bar. Even with those couple of things that I've said, this is a fantastic speech. And it just goes to show that you don't need this huge amount of time on stage to make an impact and to say something impactful. This speech is 7 minutes long. For those of you who are in Toastmasters, this is a Toastmasters speech. It would not get disqualified in the international speech contest. It's 7 minutes and what is it? However many seconds. You'd be able to do this as a Toastmaster. Can you make your short speeches have as much impact as this? And you can see that there isn't this huge toolbox of techniques. It's not the case of, I didn't realize there was these techniques, and because I don't know these techniques, it means I can't do a good speech. I don't think anything that I've said today will have really surprised you. It won't be something that you don't know about. Maybe the anaphora and the epistrophe is a little bit nerdy, but you can recognize when someone says 3 things in a row, can't you? You can recognize when someone uses a different language in a speech. You can recognize that when someone uses a metaphor or an analogy. These aren't these hidden secrets of public speaking. It's Understanding the toolbox, picking the right tool for the task. This was a hugely difficult task that Jacinda took on, but she understood the tools that would help her to take on that task, and in my opinion, she absolutely nailed it.